A lot of the a lot of the dissatisfaction that people express in reading these classics could have been avoided if they just read a smaller volume by this author first. Hello. Hi. I'm a local hippie. And today we're going to be talking about how to approach the classics. If you've been wanting to read classics, but you're just not sure where to begin, you're not sure, you know, like what book to choose or like where you should begin, even, this is the video for you. But I do kind of want to preface this by saying these are just some of the tips that have personally helped me get into classic literature and to fall in love with classics. Um, and as with a lot of things in life, reading is subjective and there's no crash course to classic literature. This is just what has helped me. This is my approach, the approach that I have adapted since I started reading classics. So, with that being said, let's get started. Number one, I think it's a very good idea to start out with a compilation of short stories or essays by whatever the classic author you're interested in. You don't have to do that, but that's a good way to kind of acclimate to their style, get to know them, um, get to know their cadence and how their writing flows and whether you like it or not. But one of the first things I read as a classic enthusiast or a beginner classic enthusiast was The Dubliners, or I always call it The Dubliners. It's actually just called Dubliners by James Joyce. Um, and I have it right here. I've actually got 6 books as like examples for literature you can get into um, if you want to get into classics. And this just so happens to be what I read, Dubliners. And although I didn't enjoy it that much, I don't, it's been a long time since I read this, but if you look, I got all kinds of notes and tabs in here from when I did read it. So even if you get into the classic author and maybe you don't enjoy their style, which is what happened with me and James Joyce, I think, at least for me, it's easy for me to dislike something or dislike classics in general, but see their merit um, objectively. So, like I said before, it's been a while since I read this one. I probably will reread one or two of the short stories that I really enjoyed and then come back with a video on each of them if I ever do that. But yeah, so I would say start out with a compilation. It doesn't have to be James Joyce, it could be Washington Irving. I've got that here as well. Uh, um, or Charles Dickens. We've got his compilation of Christmas stories. So, like any author you're interested in when picking up classics, I would say check and see if they've got a collection of short stories or a collection of essays. I don't have a collection of essays from any of the authors I enjoy. That's my first tip for getting into classics. Then tip number 2 is going to be read the smallest volume the author you're interested in has. So, like, for example, maybe if you want to get into George Orwell, you do Animal Farm because it's super short and it's so slim. And also, this is one of my favorite books of all time in history. And I think this might be considered a modern classic. Maybe. I don't know. But for instance, if you want to read George Orwell, I do Animal Farm. And then what I did with Dostoevsky, because you know we got to talk about Dostoevsky, is I read Notes from Underground first. This was the first thing I was introduced to by Dostoevsky was Notes from Underground. I would kind of change that if I could. If I could go back, I would change that, and I would probably read his collection of short stories, Poor Folk, first. And I touched on that in my How to Approach Dostoevsky video as well. Also, with some other authors, really, if you're interested in Herman Melville, because people just, I mean, the things I've heard about Moby Dick and a lot of the critique that I hear sometimes is one of two things: it's his style of writing or the density with which he writes. And that's why I would say don't jump into an author's magnum opus. I see that a lot too, or like one of their greatest works. I see a lot of people jumping into Crime and Punishment as their first Dostoevsky book, or jumping into The Brothers Karamazov as their first Dostoevsky book. Like, I totally understand wanting to read those really, really big, buzzworthy kind of books that people talk about a lot, but a lot of the dissatisfaction that people express in reading these classics could have been avoided if they just read a smaller volume by this author first, or read a short story by this author first. But there's no glory in that. There's no academic glory in reading a short story um, by an author, which is just a whole nother thing, that another conversation we have to have. I digress. But if you want to start reading Herman Melville, try Bartleby the Scrivener. It's about maybe 50 or 60 pages, and it'll get you acclimated to the density with which Melville wrote, and also his sense of humor. Because I think when people first think of classics, they don't think of funny, comical, enjoyable, very entertaining writing. And these are a lot of the ways that I would describe Melville. And I am someone who has read Moby Dick. Moby Dick is one of my favorite books. It's top two up there with Crime and Punishment. So I can tell you that's what his style is like. And, he gets a lot of flack for the less than compact nature of his writing. But if you jump into a short story first, you'll see that. And because it's short and it's not 600 pages long, you're not going to feel overwhelmed jumping into that. And also, one of the very first classic I ever read, I believe it might have been Dracula, but I didn't finish it. But this is the first classic I read and I ever finished, which is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This one is a little bit thicker than, let's say, Notes from Underground or Animal Farm. But what, as a person being introduced to classics for what I would say the very first official time, this was the perfect book to start with, because it was so beautifully written, which is important for me. And then also the writing was so accessible. And that's another thing that people kind of don't realize about classics, is that even though they're written in a different time and the language may be a little different than how we speak today, the cadence of our language today, it's still English and it's very accessible. So yeah, I would say, just if you're interested in an author, see if they have slim volumes, see if they have a compilation of short stories, a compilation of essays. Many authors do have, many classic authors do have short stories and essays, even volumes of poetry. Herman Melville did poetry as well, and I have that on my shelf, but I just kind of wanted to keep it condensed to these six books as just examples of, you know, smaller volumes and compilations or collections that you could get into very easily. Because one of the things that I want to do here on this channel is encourage people to not only read more, but also read more classics. Not because they're super like advanced, or because I'm trying to be pretentious or I'm promoting being pretentious, but because these books are amazing. And once you find your stride and once you give them a try, you'll see they're not as intimidating as you think they are. I mean, I've had some of the most fun I've ever had with classic novels. So with that, again, I just want to say this is my methodology. You don't have to adhere to this at all if you don't want to. But if you've ever had that kind of fear because I had that fear of like big books in general, that fear of classic literature, thinking it's going to be so different from, what you're reading now and what you're used to as a reader. They're not that different. And I just kind of want to encourage people to give them a try. So, yeah, with that being said, let me know in the comments below, what was your first classic? What was the first classic you ever read? Put that down in the comments below. I really want to know. So, with that being said, I hope you have a good day. I hope you have a good evening. And most importantly, I hope you read a good book. And I'll see you when I see you. Bye.